I'm Connor Old, and welcome to another episode of Masters of Controlled Chaos. Today, we're going to be looking at an underrated director in maybe the mainstream sense, but a legend and a genius in the cinephile sense. He is the director of Sunset Boulevard, of The Apartment, of Some Like It Hot. He is none other than Billy Wilder. Welcome back, guys. If you're new to this series, what we do every single week is we break down a new filmmaker and talk about the general idea of what makes them great. But if you're, a welcome viewer, welcome back. I'd love to hear your comments below, like the video, tell me all that good stuff. And today I decided to do Billy Wilder, and this is sort of one that's been coming along in a while. He was one of the early ones, and I haven't really got a chance to do him. But now it's got to really get into him because I hadn't actually seen a lot of his movies until I started doing a lot of the research and going into sort of his back catalog. I've only seen 2, I think, so it's interesting to really see it. And I actually saw Some Like It Hot for the very first time that it was meant to be seen on the big screen, so I saw it in the theaters at my local cinema. It was a great time. I'll be talking about that movie a little bit later. But Billy Wilder, of course, he is undoubtedly a great movie director. And at the top of the show, I did mention, actually one thing, I know I have new glasses, I just want to put that out of the way for if you're wondering whatnot. I also have a hat repping here. The Ottawa Senators, my favorite hockey team, that's where it's at. But so like I was saying, Billy Wilder, I said underrated just because as someone like a Hitchcock maybe, it would be the most recognizable older director that has sort of the cachet, even something like a Kubrick or, maybe a Capra, but I think Billy Wilder doesn't have necessarily that sort of name recognition that a lot of people maybe have to some of the more modern directors. But it's very confusing to me, at least, because, well, it's not, I guess, but he doesn't necessarily have that name recognition that he should. Sunset Boulevard is on AFI's top 12 movies of all time. It's considered one of the greatest movies of all time. A lot of people have it on their lists. Double Indemnity is considered the best noir movie of all time. Some Like It Hot is #1 for AFI of top comedies of all time. So in all these genres, in noir and comedy and just movies in general, and movies about Hollywood or just journalism, all this crazy stuff where War, Stalag 17, he's just done so many genres and excelled in those genres. That doesn't mean he's necessarily pigeonholed. And that's one thing I love about Billy Wilder's movies. So unlike a Stanley Kubrick and a Rob Reiner, who I know I've been talking about all the time, I don't know if I'm ever going to get to him, but they're really good at doing movies in different genres. So Kubrick, has a sexual thriller, but then he also has a war movie, and he also has a space movie. So these little genres like that. Unlike someone who Billy Wilder, who does is very much Billy Wilder's movies. And if you see a lot of his movies, even though he doesn't have super big name recognition, you can see the distinctive sort of undertones throughout his movies. And that's just because I think he nails a lot of genres into one general movie, right? So you take something like Sunset Boulevard, which is a noir movie, but also a comedy, and then also has romantic elements to it, especially something like The Apartment, which is such an incredibly complex moral sort of drama. And then you add the comedic elements, and you add the romance, and it's just all this sort of stuff where he packs a lot of these genres into it. And something like Stalag 17 is a war movie, but it's also a comedy movie. It's also a mystery movie of a suspense thriller, and it's also sort of like a satire. And really, I would say a lot of his movies have that satire a little bit of an edge, because Billy Wilder is definitely a cynical guy in the sense of throughout his movies, just cynical in terms of sort of he looks at sort of different or more negative aspects of society, of certain things, using rather say black comedy than general comedy. Of course, he's made Some Like It Hot and his 70-Year Itches, but the same light he's made The Apartment and Lost Weekend. So really dramatic movies that are heavy, and others that are really comedy, but they all have this sort of through line of cynicism, even in his funny movies like The 70-Year Itch. You look at something like Ace in the Hole is a sort of dark look at journalism. Sunset Boulevard is a dark look at Hollywood. And you could even say The Apartment, sort of like a dark look at society or big business. And I just think this allows him to have sort of a sharp satire that goes throughout a lot of his genres. And he has sort of a cynical sort of look to it that has sort of holed up into a lot of things where we can always look back and, the glamorous Hollywoods, but then he was sort of the outlier and makes him unique because he was at the time criticizing what's going on at the time, which is super sort of a unique thing. And I think actually the character that William Holden plays in Sunset Boulevard is a great example of sort of his sort of frustrations, because as a writer, he's a writer. And that's the next point I want to make is you could arguably say that Billy Wilder is a better writer than he is a director, because he writes all of his movies, except for a couple. He does a lot of collaborations on the writing and whatnot for general ideas, but he's definitely a writer, and especially in 50s Hollywood, they weren't necessarily respected respected, and that's why he became a writer, because he was writing for William Wyler, but then didn't really get the respect he deserved. So he really wanted to show that he's a writer, but he's also an artist, and he can direct as well. And I just say he could be a better writer than he is a director, because there's no improv on set. His vision was to film the script. So he's definitely that sort of that writer-centric thing. He works with actors fine, but the thing is like you have to say the lines, you have to say them the way he wants to, and he has this grand vision, which is great, but he's definitely from a writer's perspective, because if you don't know modern day, cinema, I know Max Landis often talks about this, like he says, Victor Frankenstein, which is a script he wrote, probably like 60% of what he wrote was in the movie. So it's like, what do you mean you wrote the script? Isn't that what the movie is? It's like, no, things change, they change things up. Improv, especially on modern day comedies, the script is so light that it's just like, whatever they improv on the spot, but then you see a different type of comedy, more like someone like Edgar Wright, who does that more today compared to like an Adam McKay or whatnot. Billy Wilder does more of the Edgar Wright thing, where it's very scripted. We shoot the script. There's setup, punchline, setup, punchline, setup, punchline, and we'll really get into something like a little bit later, a little bit of a tease. But really, the way Billy Wilder was focused at the time is he split into two sort of subcategories. So he was at first the noir guy with Double Indemnity and The Lost Weekend, and even in like Sunset Boulevard, but then he sort of transitioned into like the romantic comedy guy with something like Some Like It Hot and 7-Year Itch and The Apartment. And some people consider The Apartment a romantic comedy. It's romantic, not very, very funny. It's almost like a romantic drama, but there's of course funny aspects to that. That's just a great overall movie, and like I said, just the genres you can't necessarily classify as, you can say Some Like It Hot is a comedy because it has more comedic elements than it has dramatic, but there's dramatic stuff, and there's a lot of romance there, but it's mostly a comedy, right? And Stalag 17, you can say it's mostly a war movie, but there's still a lot of funny aspects, and there's still a mystery sort of aspect that goes through in hard-edged characters and has a noir-y feel to it. Like I said, that sort of underline of cynicism gives that satire to a lot of his movies. So they're very complicated. Actually, going back to the point where he's sort of put into these two different boxes, I consider him similar to Christopher Nolan's career. And of course, his new movie Dunkirk came out. I'm a big fan of that. And the way Christopher Nolan's first pitch was, he did Following, then he did Memento, then he did Insomnia, and he's sort of like, oh, this is like our new noir guy. He's going to be doing all these sort of detective noir movies, maybe like a David Fincher, we'll say. But then he turned into sort of like this big blockbustery, intelligent blockbustery guy, similar to how Billy Wilder started off with doing all these fantastic noir movies, but then transitioned into something that's like very big and blockbustery and working with biggest stars, Marilyn Monroe, Tony Curtis, Cary Grant was supposed to work with him for a long time, but it never ended up happening. They're supposed to work with Frank Sinatra. So he works with a lot of these sort of big stars later on in his career, even though he started in this sort of noir detective style. And then, although he was well liked at the time, he hasn't really stayed, even though he won 6 Oscars. Someone like Hitchcock has stayed around, but didn't win any Oscars. This guy won 6 Oscars, I think mostly for Sunset Boulevard and some writings here and there. So like I said, going back to the writing point, he's definitely more of a writer than a director. And of course, the last thing I want to point out is just the way he ends movies. Someone like the Coen brothers, I know I love the Coen brothers, but their endings are very strange, and I actually love that because they're different, but a lot of their movies is just like, keeps on going and going and going, and then it ends. There's no sort of like finale moment, but Billy Wilder is all about the finale moments and the sort of last lines. The Apartment, Shut Up and Deal, or Sunset Boulevard's Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up, or Something Like It Hot, Nobody's Perfect, or Ace in the Hole, where it's what is it? Oh yeah, do you want $1,000? Because I'm $1,000 man, I'm gonna work for free. And then he's like drunk, so he goes and he falls and lands in front of the camera. Like, I just named these off the top of my head, because the endings are so perfect. Like, could you name an ending to another movie? The line, maybe not, but Wilder's synonymous with his endings, and he's got incredible ones, and you almost want to wait for it to end. And he's definitely sort of have a bit of his a bit of the ending story. I noticed he leaves right until the end, where modern day movies don't do that, so they sort of let the last 20 minutes be the end, but he really is the end. And that's why I say, though, I think his movies are definitely rewatchable. If you're worried about they're in black and white or whatnot, they're really funny, especially something like Some Like It Hot. I think it totally holds up today. But anyways, let's move over into what I consider his best movie, Sunset Boulevard. Now, this was a really hard one for me because Wilder is so sort of varied in that sense that he has so many great movies. Should I go with the best film noir movie of all time or the best comedy of all time? But I decided to go with one that really blends the two really well, and I'm going to go with Sunset Boulevard. I think this is also his most personal movie, talking about Hollywood. He was actually critiqued at the time, saying his career is ruined because he's sort of holding a negative look on Hollywood, and he's sort of trashing the nest that feeds him, or I forget that phrase, but you know what I'm talking about, where it was sort of a bit of a risky thing for him to do, but he totally nails it off. You have, of course, the noir aspects of the narration and you telling you the ending in the first scene of the movie, and then sort of explaining to you how that happens. Incredible narration, of course. So you have that sort of noir, dark aspect and sort of the negative look on society. But then also you have a black comedy making fun of sort of typical Hollywood stars in the industry and sort of poking holes at how sort of ridiculous this all is, and how why doesn't the light guy get more attention than maybe the star or whatever. And you know, of course, the transition from the silent era into the main era. This movie reminds me a lot of Birdman, because Michael Keaton had that sort of, the movie had that meta sense where Michael Keaton was playing Birdman, a former superhero. Of course, he played Batman and was sort of washed out, and this was sort of his regenerative career sort of thing. And then Gloria Swanson, who plays Norma Desmond in the movie, the silent film actress, she was also a silent film actress that sort of went obscured, and now this is sort of her rebound. And the same thing with Norma Desmond in the movie. But that the comedy really comes from the absurdity of Norma's character and how she's so, like the black comedy and sort of making fun of the industry and as a whole, but really sort of poking a little bit of fun at Gloria Swanson's character Norma Desmond, because she's so out there and crazy, and she thinks she's this big star, and you know the classic line, you know, you know, I'm big, it's the pictures that got small, and you know, just how funny she is, not necessarily, but just sort of laughing more at her, sort of an ironic sort of way of saying that. So you have the comedy, you have the noir aspect, but then you have this really interesting romance that has with William Holden and Norma Desmond, and sort of their interaction, and it's sort of weird, and you see the underlying tone of the movie really is like, you have, of course, Hollywood great stuff, and if you like movies, you'll watch a movie about movies, but really this movie, I think, is about obscurity and loneliness and being forgotten, and I think that's a sort of a, they use Hollywood as a way to tell that story, but I think that they do a great job at sort of still highlighting those themes. You have incredible protagonists in William Holden, who's sort of negative against the system, and just, you know, he says, oh, I thought you were making good pictures. The assistant there says, it's like, oh, that was all me. I'm just here to make money now. So you have sort of the old jaded writer versus the new passionate writer, and the assistant there, I'm forgetting her name. And so you have sort of this interesting love triangle that Billy Wilder is incredible at doing in Some Like It Hot, in The Apartment, and Sunset Boulevard, and he does really, his best movies include a love triangle, but something like Fedora, for example, didn't really work, even though it does have a love triangle. That being said, I still think you have all these great aspects come together. It's an incredible noir movie. It's really funny. It's really poignant. It has that satire aspect to it, and just I think it benefits by being made in the 50s. And it's incredible to say, wow, this was made in the 50s, but it was made in Golden Age Hollywood, a time that we think as this glamorous time. And to really make a movie in that time about how non-glamorous this is, it was sort of a meta thing. And now looking back at it, it's a great period piece. It's just a phenomenal movie, top to bottom. It's pitch perfect, how the movie flows, a sort of old, nostalgic, classic feel to it, and how the music sort of goes through with an incredible score. And I just think that the characters in this movie are really morally rich in terms of they have a lot of different viewpoints, and you see that through the three different characters and how they're similar in some ways and they're different in others. And just, I mean, top to bottom, especially the costume design, the cinematography, the way these use like lights, pools of light from windows. That's something like Spielberg's Janusz Kaminski does more recently in his movies, but that was sort of used early on at the beginning. Incredible use of lighting, setting it in black and white, just pitch perfect choices from Billy Wilder and the cast. Everything sort of came together in this really unique way to just deliver this phenomenal movie, and everyone knew what kind of movie they were making, and you could see it. And so many incredible lines, of course, an incredible ending, an incredible start, and just a blast. I would recommend this to any cinephile just to catch up on what makes a good movie. But if you want to know what makes a phenomenal comedy, watch Some Like It Hot. And this is my favorite. I chose this instead of Sunset Boulevard just because comedies are easier to like, and maybe I saw it in the theater and maybe that helped with me, but I think it's just so funny. This is AFI, as I said, #1 movie of all time. And I think it's a classic sort of lesson on what a great comedy is. It's like set up punchline, set up punchline, set up punchline, and it goes through in the crazy sort of wacky hijinks scenarios that Billy Wilder doesn't do. He's a little more subdued mostly, but he really goes all out over the top in this. And so my big like why I love this movie so much is Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon playing Josephine and Daphne, and just their incredible relationship and their chemistry is off the charts good. I mean, they feel like they've been friends for a long time. You know, Jack Lemmon's character feels like he's sort of like this charismatic, sort of strong guy, but he can eventually be totaled down and sort of told by Tony Curtis what the right thing is, and Tony Curtis is definitely the leader, and you can see that Jack Lemmon will eventually sort of break, and that interesting, unique aspect of it, and sometimes you're cheering for Tony Curtis, sometimes you're cheering for Jack Lemmon, and that's interesting love triangle of trying to get the amazing Marilyn Monroe. And she, unlike any movie star ever, and I think she'll be the only unique one, an incredible amount of aura that she represents. She oozes sexuality, and just, I think a lot of people sort of, you can look into her personal life and people criticize her for that, but also I think that she's not just like this dumb blonde. It plays to her strengths because she's sort of this sexy goddess meets this dumb blonde character, but she also holds her own in the more dramatic scenes, which not a lot of dumb blondes can do. That's why I think she sort of elevates that, and the ability to sort of turn it on and have that sexy sort of aura, just, it's an incredible amount. So you have this great chemistry that we see in something like a buddy cop movie or whatnot, but then you add Marilyn Monroe on top of that, who just like totally takes up the screen and your attention, and it's like she's magnetic, and it's really this interesting thing where not a lot of people have ever really done that. And it's got all types of humor. I think it's really funny. It holds up really well. It's got physical humor, of course. It's got quotable dialogue in terms of the funny jokes. You have funny scenarios. You have relatability humor, which is a big one for me, where you're just like, oh, I know what that is, and just the funny little scenario that they get themselves into. It's just, you know, it's hard to sort of critique a comedy, but if it really makes you laugh, it's like I can look over some of the weaker parts of the film because it makes me laugh, and I love these characters so much. That's why I went with something like Sunset Boulevard, which is so pitch perfect. Like, I cannot find one thing wrong with it. So something like a Hot, I maybe see some of the stuff, but I'm putting it away because I'm having such a great time. And I recommend something like a Hot over any of Billy Wilder's movies, just because I think it's a good way to get you into the sort of movies, because it is so funny and so quotable, and everyone knows of Marilyn Monroe, so you can sort of see her performances as not just like this picture, but really as a great actress. And then just quickly I want to point out, underrated, I think, is Stalag 17. I was going to go with Ace in the Hole, which is such a poignant, great movie about journalism, but I feel like I heard of Ace in the Hole before. I have not heard of Stalag 17, maybe because of the weird name, but it's a war movie, but it's not a war movie because it's set in a POW camp. So it's an unusual war movie, sort of like the first half of Full Metal Jacket, where it's like a boot camp, but it's almost like a summer camp feel. There's great comedy to it, of this sort of sex-deprived guys, but then you have this really interesting, mysterious sort of line that goes through to see, like, is there a mole? Who's telling this? And then, of course, the beginning and the end of the great trying to exit. The escape sequences are really, really done well, and it seems very modern, and I think this is another one to recommend because it's sort of an interesting one. You'd only see this if you're looking to Billy Wilder's movies, but if you watch this video, check out Stalag 17 because it's a really great one. But first, Some Like It Hot. Anyways, guys, for all those reasons, that's why Billy Wilder is a master of controlled chaos. Make sure you like the video, comment below, let me know what your favorite Billy Wilder movie is and who I should do next. I know I'm going to do Steven Soderbergh next week because there's a new movie, Logan Lucky's coming out, and I've heard great things about that, so I can't wait to do that. But anyways, guys, I'm Connor Old, and until next time, stay tuned.